Okay, now this is gonna be a lesson on abnormal psychology. Welcome back, guys. Let's talk about this topic now. If you're taking this course from a semester-long standpoint on abnormal psychology, this is the first lesson that I'll give to you. If you're taking this as a class, an introduction to psychology or general psychology, this is gonna be the last lesson that you receive in the semester. So it's an important lesson. Look, overall, the field of psychology, and I mentioned this before for my intro to psych students, or for my abnormal psych students, you should know this. The field of psychology overall is divided into two main areas. The main area of research and the main area of applied psychology. From a research standpoint, this is where you try to understand psychology, and you pretty much work on a standpoint of just academic growth, academic knowledge. So you just want to conduct research to understand more about the mind, more about the behavior of people. But if you're taking this class if you understand this field, from the perspective of applied psychology is when you take some of those lessons and how to understand how to conduct research, and we apply it to try to help people. In the field of applied, there's different branches, but no branch is as popular as clinical psychology. The reason why most people decide to study psychology is because they want to become therapists, counselors, clinicians, psychiatrists. So they work in the field of clinical. They're interested in helping people. They're interested in becoming therapists. They're interested in that area. That's by far the most popular area of psychology overall. It is, of course, the most popular area within applied psychology. So this is an understanding, a brief definition, a brief introduction into what is abnormal psychology. Now, first thing is we want to break it back to the overall definition of psychology. So psychology is the study of scientific study of behavior and mental processes. When we add the word abnormal, now this becomes the scientific study of abnormal behavior and abnormal mental processes. This, however, lays out a very interesting discussion and somewhat of a complex, even philosophical question. What makes something normal? What makes something abnormal? So, think about it. What makes something normal? Most often, something is considered normal when a lot of people do it, like based on the number of people that does it. Most likely, something is considered normal when it is considered legal. But in this standpoint, we want to think of normality as a very subjective trait, a very subjective idea. Depending, for example, on the way that you were raised, something that is considered normal in your society, in your culture, might not be considered normal in my culture. So, abnormal and normal can be sometimes kind of subjective, alright? So, what we're mostly interested from a perspective of something that is not only abnormal but is clinically a problem. In the field of abnormal psychology, we have 3 B's that describe what something abnormal becomes now a psychological disorder. There's a golden rule, and you want to know this especially if you want to become a professional in the field of mental health. So, question is, say, because of the pandemic and everything that is going on, at the time that I'm recording this video, we're still in the middle of the pandemic. So, if you have a family member that passed away due to this pandemic, it's normal to experience a sense of sadness, it's normal to experience grief, it's normal to experience even some type of depression. To what point does an understandable and somewhat normal depression or grief becomes a clinical disorder? At what point does it become a clinical depression? That's the main emphasis on this course, right? So something being normal or abnormal can be very subjective, but the main focus of this area is on the clinically significant problems. What makes something a clinically significant problem is established by 3Ds. So at one point, does the loss of someone becomes normal grief, and at one point does it become a psychological disorder? 3Ds. The first D is deviance. When behavior becomes deviant, or when mental processes become deviant, then you're establishing one of the first areas where it's becoming a clinical problem. Deviance means out of the norm, like out of the ordinary. But it should be known that deviant behavior can actually be welcomed in some instances. So a point that always comes up is, for example, musicians. As much as we all may like music, not everybody can be a musician, to be honest. And not everybody can be a successful, famous musician. A couple years ago, I watched Bohemian Rhapsody, and I liked Queen before, but I became then super obsessed, and I'm still not over it. I'm a huge fan of Queen. And think of, the musician, the lead singer of Queen, Freddie Mercury. That guy is totally off the ordinary. But we welcome that, we cherish that, we celebrate that. When someone is out of the norm, in some instances, it's not perceived as something negative, it's actually perceived as something wonderful. So deviance by itself is not the only component that would establish something as a psychological disorder. The second one then is distress. To what extent or to what point does the problem brings me a sense of stress? So distress is also somewhat subjective because it depends on the person, Say, for example, anxiety. You can experience anxiety, but anxiety for some people can be somewhat of a welcome experience. When I feel anxious, when I feel nervous, but when someone feels anxious, when someone feels nervous, it's actually not a bad thing. Say, for anybody that has ever done bungee jumping, or for someone that has ever done a parachute, someone that has jumped from an airplane, those sensations can be quite risky, and it's a very nerve-wracking experience, but you welcome it, you cherish it. Not even the moment is as wonderful as the experience that goes before that. So it's a little bit of distress, but it can be a welcome experience. However, if the stress that is building in you is out of the norm, then you have two of the Ds, is building up to meet the criteria of what is a psychological disorder. So the most important of all of these is the third D. This is the most important of all three of them. And this, guys, is the key to understand psychological disorders. When the behavior that is considered abnormal is out of the norm, is bringing stress, and more importantly, when it's affecting life, then it meets the criteria to be a psychological disorder. If a family member passes away, it's normal to experience grief, it's normal to experience sadness. To what point would this meet the criteria to be clinical depression? Well, to the point where it starts to affect your life. If now, because of this ongoing, recurrent, powerful sadness, you cannot get out of your bed in the mornings, you sleep all day, or you cannot sleep at all, you overeat, or you don't eat at all, you have a lot of difficulty with families and friends, or you're overwhelming families and friends, and it's affecting, it's not letting you do your things, you're not capable of going to work, or you're working all day, you name it. At that point then, you're seeing now how it builds up to be clinical depression. To the point where it starts to affect your life, it becomes a clinical depression, and that pretty much applies to everything. So, quick couple examples. everybody can be everybody can experience a little bit of psychological disorders. Anybody can, really. Say OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder. Some people may like to have order in their life. If this is just who they are, they like to have things organized. I like to have my clothes in this drawer, and I want to have all the whites here and all the rest of the color clothes here. You may want to do that. Does that make you OCD? No, you don't. Or you don't. But if on the other hand, you have, you have a painting in your living room, and it's looking just a little bit off the edge, and it's bothering you, and you go to work and you're thinking about that the whole time, you're not able to, you go out on a date and the only thing that you're thinking of, man, is that painting was not looking sharp. That painting was not looking balanced. It's affecting your life. So that intrusive thought is going and going and going in your mind. Then it might meet the criteria to say that it's a psychological disorder. To finish it up and wrap it up, the last D is reserved for some cases, but it doesn't apply to all psychological disorders, so it should be taken with somewhat of a skepticism. Danger. Some psychological disorders are dangerous. Some psychological disorders can be very dangerous actually, because they can lead a person to hurt themselves or hurt other people. But this is not the case for all psychological disorders. Say, for example, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. Is a person gonna die out of ADHD? No. But say you compare this to, say, bipolar disorder with extreme, ongoing, very powerful mood swings and this emotional instability, can a person hurt themselves with others? Hell yeah. So danger is a component that applies to some, but not all psychological disorders. And this would wrap up the introduction to abnormal behavior. Hope you liked it. Thank you guys, and let's move on.